Sarah Chen had always been invisible. At 25, she walked through the military base with her head down, carrying cleaning supplies and maintenance tools that seemed too heavy for her small frame. The other soldiers barely acknowledged her existence, treating her like part of the background noise that came with army life. She wasn't a soldier in their eyes, she was just the girl who cleaned their barracks and fixed their broken equipment. The daughter of a Chinese immigrant father and an American mother who died when she was 12, Sarah had learned early that the world could be cruel to those who didn't fit neatly into boxes. Her father worked double shifts at a factory to keep food on the table, and, when he passed away from a heart attack during her senior year of high school, Sarah found herself completely alone. The military offered her a job in maintenance and logistics, not because she was particularly wanted, but because they needed someone willing to do the work nobody else wanted to do. At Fort Braxton, Sarah's days began before dawn. She would quietly slip into the mess hall to help prepare breakfast, her movements efficient and practiced. The cooks barely spoke to her, except to bark orders or complain when something wasn't done fast enough. "Hey, you," was how most people addressed her. Very few bothered to learn her name. She had become accustomed to being treated like furniture, useful when needed, ignored otherwise. The soldiers she worked around were mostly young men who had joined the army for glory, adventure, or simply because they had no other options. They would joke loudly about their training exercises, boast about their strength, and make crude comments about women they found attractive. Sarah was never part of their conversations, never included in their banter. To them, she was just the quiet girl who mopped their floors and restocked their supplies. What they didn't know was that Sarah had been studying. Every night after her 16-hour shifts, she would retreat to her small quarters and read military strategy books, tactical manuals, and historical accounts of famous battles. She had taught herself multiple languages, Mandarin from her father, Spanish from online courses, and Arabic from books she borrowed from the base library. She understood maps and logistics in ways that would have impressed her superiors, if they had ever bothered to ask. Her direct supervisor was Sergeant Morrison, a heavy-set man in his 40s who seemed to take pleasure in making Sarah's life difficult. He would inspect her work with a magnifying glass, finding faults where none existed, and assign her the most unpleasant tasks available. "Chen," he would growl, "the latrines need scrubbing again. And, this time, do it right." Sarah would simply nod and get to work, never complaining, never showing the frustration that burned inside her chest. The other maintenance workers weren't much better. They were mostly older men who had been passed over for promotions and younger soldiers who were serving out disciplinary assignments. They resented Sarah for reasons they couldn't quite articulate, perhaps because she worked harder than they did, or because she never complained about the treatment they all received. They would hide her tools, accidentally knock over her work, and spread rumors about her personal life that were both cruel and completely fabricated. One particularly difficult day, Sarah was tasked with cleaning the officers' quarters. As she worked, she overheard a heated discussion between two lieutenants about a training exercise that had gone wrong. The problem was with supply lines, equipment wasn't reaching the troops when and where it was needed. Sarah listened carefully as they debated solutions, all of which seemed unnecessarily complicated and unlikely to work. As she continued cleaning, Sarah mentally worked through the logistics problem. She could see the solution clearly: a reorganization of the supply routes that would cut delivery time in half and reduce the risk of equipment being lost or delayed. It was so obvious to her that she almost spoke up, but caught herself just in time. Who was she to interrupt officers? She was just the cleaning girl. That evening, Sarah retreated to her quarters and sketched out her solution on a piece of paper. The plan was detailed and thorough, addressing not just the immediate problem but also potential complications that might arise. She looked at her work and felt a familiar mix of pride and frustration. She had skills and knowledge that could help, but no one would ever ask for her input. The next morning brought a new humiliation. Sarah was in the supply room, taking inventory, when a group of young soldiers burst in looking for equipment. They were loud and aggressive, treating the supply room like their personal playground. When Sarah tried to maintain order and follow proper procedures, they began to mock her. "Look at her, trying to act all official," one of them laughed. "What are you going to do, write us up?" The others joined in, making exaggerated salutes and pretending to be afraid of her authority. Sarah tried to remain professional, but they pushed her aside and began grabbing equipment without signing for it. "Please," Sarah said quietly, "I need to log what you're taking." This only made them laugh harder. One particularly cruel soldier, Private Johnson, began mimicking her accent, making her words sound foreign and strange. "Please," he mocked in a high-pitched voice, "I need to log what you're taking." The others roared with laughter. The situation escalated when Johnson deliberately knocked over a stack of carefully organized supplies. "Oops," he said with fake concern, "looks like someone's going to have to clean this up. Good thing we have our little maid here." Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes but forced them back. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Word of the incident spread quickly through the base. By lunchtime, Sarah had become the subject of cruel jokes and whispered comments. People would walk past her and make exaggerated bowing motions, pretending to be servants. Others would speak in mock Chinese accents, even though Sarah's English was perfectly fluent and unaccented. The harassment followed her everywhere she went. Sergeant Morrison seemed to take particular pleasure in her humiliation. He began assigning her even more degrading tasks and would make loud comments about her attitude problem when she tried to maintain her dignity. "Some people," he would say within earshot of other soldiers, "don't know their place around here." The breaking point came 3 days later. Sarah was in the motor pool, performing routine maintenance on vehicles, when a group of soldiers approached her. They had been drinking, despite it being only mid-afternoon, and their intentions were clearly hostile. Johnson was among them, still angry about being made to look foolish during the supply room incident. Well, Johnson slurred, "if it isn't our favorite little nobody. Still pretending to be important?" The others spread out around her, blocking any easy escape routes. Sarah put down her tools and tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. "I think she needs to learn some respect," another soldier added. "Maybe we should teach her what happens to people who don't know their place." Sarah's heart began to race as she realized the danger she was in. These men weren't just going to humiliate her with words, they intended to hurt her. "Please," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her fear, "I don't want any trouble." But Johnson stepped closer, his breath reeking of alcohol and his eyes full of malice. "Too late for that," he said. "You should have thought about that before you started acting like you're better than everyone else." What happened next would change everything, though Sarah didn't know it at the time. As Johnson raised his hand to strike her, a commanding voice cut through the tension like a blade. "What the hell is going on here?" The soldiers immediately snapped to attention, their faces going pale as they recognized the voice. Sarah looked past them to see 3 figures approaching, 3 officers whose presence commanded immediate respect and whose reputations were known throughout the entire military. But, in that moment, as she stood surrounded by her tormentors with tears of humiliation and fear in her eyes, Sarah had no idea that her life was about to change forever. She was still just the invisible girl, the nobody that everyone ignored or abused. She had no way of knowing that these 3 officers, General Patricia Hayes, General Marcus Thompson, and General David Liu, were about to recognize something in her that would shock everyone on the base. All she knew was that she was tired of being treated like she didn't matter, tired of being invisible, and tired of pretending that the constant cruelty didn't hurt. As the 3 generals approached, Sarah straightened her shoulders and prepared for whatever came next, not knowing that she was about to discover her true worth in the most unexpected way possible. 3 General Patricia Hayes was the first to reach the group. A woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in a perfect bun, she had earned her position through decades of distinguished service and was known for her sharp mind and zero tolerance for bullying. Behind her walked General Marcus Thompson, a tall African-American man whose calm demeanor hid a fierce intelligence, and General David Liu, whose family had immigrated from Taiwan and who had become one of the youngest generals in Army history. "I asked what's going on here," General Hayes repeated, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made grown men tremble. The soldiers who had been surrounding Sarah scrambled to form a proper line, their earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. "Nothing, ma'am," Johnson stammered, his alcohol-fueled bravado completely gone. "Just having a conversation with the maintenance worker." General Hayes's eyes narrowed as she took in the scene, Sarah standing alone against a wall, tools scattered on the ground, and 5 soldiers who clearly had her cornered. A conversation that required 5 of you to corner one civilian worker? Her voice was deadly quiet. General Thompson stepped forward, his experienced eyes reading the situation immediately. "Miss," he addressed Sarah directly, "are you injured?" Sarah shook her head, not trusting her voice to remain steady. General Liu was studying her face intently, something nagging at the back of his memory. "What's your name?" General Hayes asked Sarah gently, her tone completely different from the one she had used with the soldiers. "Sarah Chen, ma'am," Sarah replied, finally, finding her voice. "I work in maintenance and logistics." The moment Sarah spoke, General Liu's eyes widened in recognition. He stepped closer, studying her features more carefully. "Chen," he repeated slowly. "Are you related to Captain James Chen?" Sarah's breath caught in her throat. No one had mentioned her father's military service in years. Most people didn't even know about it. "He was my father," she said quietly. "But he died when I was 18. The 3 generals exchanged glances that the surrounding soldiers couldn't interpret. There was something significant happening here, something that went far beyond a simple harassment incident. General Liu's voice became respectful, almost reverent. "Your father saved my life in Afghanistan," he said simply. "He died pulling 3 men out of a burning vehicle, including me. I was just a lieutenant then." Sarah felt the world shift around her. Her father had rarely talked about his military service, and she had never known the details of how he died. She had been told it was a training accident, nothing heroic or significant. The silence that followed was broken by General Thompson. "James Chen was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously," he added. "The ceremony was classified because the mission was classified. We've been looking for his family for years to present them with his medal and ensure they received the benefits they were entitled to." Sarah's legs suddenly felt weak. She had struggled financially after her father's death, working multiple jobs to pay for school, and eventually ending up in this dead-end position because she couldn't afford better options. All this time, she had been entitled to educational benefits, healthcare, and support that could have changed her entire life. General Hayes turned her attention back to the soldiers, her expression cold enough to freeze fire. "You 5 have 30 seconds to explain why you thought it was appropriate to harass the daughter of a Medal of Honor recipient." Johnson and his friends looked like they wanted the ground to swallow them whole. They had no explanation that would satisfy the generals, and they knew it. The story of what had really been happening, months of bullying, harassment, and systematic mistreatment, began to come out in fits and starts. "She's just maintenance," one of them mumbled weakly. "Just maintenance?" General Hayes's voice rose dangerously. "This woman is the daughter of one of the bravest men I've ever had the honor to serve alongside, and you've been treating her like garbage?" The general's anger was palpable, but Sarah was still processing the revelation about her father. General Liu turned back to Sarah, his expression apologetic. "I'm sorry we didn't find you sooner. Your father's sacrifice meant everything to those of us who served with him. He talked about you constantly, how proud he was of your intelligence, your determination, your character." "He never told me he was in combat," Sarah said softly. "He said he just did supply runs and maintenance work." "That's what good soldiers do," General Thompson explained. "They protect their families from the weight of what they've seen and done. But your father was no ordinary soldier. He was one of the finest men I've ever known." As word spread through the base that the 3 visiting generals had stopped their inspection to deal with a harassment incident, curious soldiers began gathering at a respectful distance. What they saw confused them, the generals treating the maintenance girl with what looked like deep respect and reverence. Sergeant Morrison appeared, drawn by the commotion. When he saw the generals talking to Sarah, his face went pale. He had been Sarah's primary tormentor for months, and if she decided to tell them about his behavior, his career would be over. "Sergeant Morrison," General Hayes called out, having spotted him trying to blend into the crowd. "Please join us." Morrison approached reluctantly, his usual swagger completely absent. "Yes, ma'am? This is one of your workers, correct?" General Hayes gestured to Sarah. Yes, ma'am. Chen works in my department. And how would you rate her performance? Morrison glanced nervously at Sarah, clearly weighing his options. If he lied and said she was a good worker, it would raise questions about why he had been treating her so poorly. If he told the truth about his opinion of her, he would be insulting the daughter of a Medal of Honor recipient in front of 3 generals. She does adequate work, ma'am, he said finally, choosing the safest middle ground he could think of. General Liu stepped forward. Adequate? There was something dangerous in his tone. Could you be more specific about her duties and capabilities? This was exactly what Morrison had been afraid of. He had never bothered to properly evaluate Sarah's work because he had dismissed her as unimportant from the beginning. He knew she showed up every day and completed her assigned tasks, but, beyond that, he had paid no attention to her actual capabilities. She handles basic maintenance and cleaning duties, Morrison said carefully. Basic maintenance, General Thompson repeated. What about her language skills? Her technical knowledge? Her understanding of logistics and supply chain management? Morrison's confused expression made it clear that he had no idea what they were talking about. He had never bothered to learn anything about Sarah's background, skills, or potential. To him, she had always been just a body to fill the least desirable positions. Sarah watched this exchange with growing amazement. These generals seemed to know more about her capabilities than her own supervisor did. It was General Hayes who explained. We've spent the last 30 minutes reviewing Miss Chen's personnel file, she said. Did you know she speaks 4 languages fluently? That she has completed advanced correspondence courses in military logistics and strategy? That she has consistently scored in the top percentile on every military aptitude test she's ever taken? Morrison's mouth fell open. He had never looked at Sarah's file beyond the basic information needed to assign her work duties. The idea that the quiet, submissive worker he had been tormenting was actually highly qualified and intelligent was completely outside his understanding. Did you know, General Liu continued, that she has been submitting detailed reports and suggestions for improving base operations? Reports that have been sitting in your inbox, unread, for months? This was news to Morrison. He barely glanced at the administrative emails that came through his computer, assuming they were all routine paperwork and spam. The idea that Sarah had been trying to contribute ideas for improvement was shocking to him. Let me ask you directly, Sergeant, General Hayes said, her voice carrying the weight of authority. Have you been treating this woman with the respect and consideration due to the daughter of a war hero? Morrison knew there was no good answer to this question. Any truthful response would end his career, but lying to a general was potentially even worse. He stood there sweating, trying to find words that wouldn't condemn him. The silence stretched on until Sarah finally spoke up. The sergeant has been following standard procedures, she said diplomatically. She could have destroyed Morrison with a few honest sentences, but something held her back. Perhaps it was compassion, or perhaps it was simply that she was too overwhelmed by the day's revelations to focus on revenge. The generals recognized what Sarah was doing, protecting a man who had made her life miserable. It was exactly the kind of character her father had displayed, and it only confirmed their growing respect for her. Miss Chen, General Thompson said formally, we have some things to discuss with you about your father's service and your own future. Would you be available to meet with us privately? Sarah nodded, still hardly believing this was really happening. As the crowd began to disperse and the chastened soldiers slunk away, she found herself walking alongside 3 of the most powerful people in the military, being treated as an equal for the first time in her adult life. But the real surprises were still to come. As they walked toward the administrative building, General Liu was already making plans that would change not just Sarah's life, but her understanding of who she really was and what she was capable of becoming. The conference room in the administrative building had never felt so important to Sarah. She sat across from 3 generals, still wearing her maintenance coveralls, feeling completely out of place yet somehow exactly where she belonged. General Hayes had dismissed everyone else from the building, ensuring their conversation would remain private. Before we discuss your future, General Liu began, you need to understand your past. He opened a thick manila folder that contained more documents than Sarah had ever seen about her father. Your father didn't just die in a training accident, Sarah. He died saving the lives of 12 soldiers during a classified rescue operation behind enemy lines. The story that unfolded over the next hour shattered everything Sarah thought she knew about her father's military service. Captain James Chen had been part of an elite intelligence unit that operated in the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan. His official cover was logistics and supply, but his real job was far more complex and dangerous. He spoke 7 languages fluently, General Thompson explained, and had an incredible ability to understand cultural nuances and local politics. He could walk into a hostile village and come out with allies. It was a rare gift. General Hayes pulled out a photograph that made Sarah gasp. It showed her father in dress uniform, standing beside 3 much younger officers, the same 3 generals who now sat before her. This was taken the day before the mission that claimed his life, she said softly. We were trapped, General Liu continued, his voice thick with emotion. Our convoy had been ambushed, and we were pinned down in a valley with no way out. The enemy had us surrounded, and our communications were cut. Your father volunteered for a suicide mission to get through their lines and call for backup. Sarah listened in stunned silence as they described her father's final hours. He had successfully reached the radio position and called in their coordinates, but instead of waiting for extraction, he had gone back for the wounded soldiers who were still trapped in the burning vehicles. He pulled out 8 men before the vehicles exploded, General Thompson said. He was going back for the 9th when the ammunition started cooking off. The blast killed him instantly, but those 8 men lived because of his courage. The room fell silent as Sarah processed this information. Her father, the quiet man who had worked double shifts at a factory to support her, had been a war hero. All those nights when he would sit silently at the dinner table, lost in thought, he had been carrying the weight of classified missions and the responsibility for other men's lives. Why wasn't I told? Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Security protocols, General Hayes explained. The mission was classified, and the families of fallen soldiers weren't given details that might compromise ongoing operations. But those protocols expired 5 years ago. We should have contacted you then. General Liu leaned forward, his expression serious. Sarah, there's more you need to know. Your father left specific instructions about you. He made us promise that if anything happened to him, we would find you and ensure you had every opportunity to serve your country the way he did. Sarah felt overwhelmed. In the span of a few hours, she had gone from being the invisible maintenance worker to discovering she was the daughter of a decorated war hero whose dying wish was that she be given a chance to follow in his footsteps. The position you're in now is completely beneath your capabilities, General Thompson said bluntly. You should never have been assigned to basic maintenance work. Someone along the way failed to properly review your qualifications. General Hayes pulled out another folder, this one containing Sarah's test scores and aptitude evaluations. You scored higher on military intelligence assessments than 98% of active duty officers. Your language skills are extraordinary, and your understanding of logistics and strategy is at a graduate level. But I never went to college, Sarah protested. I couldn't afford it after Dad died. You educated yourself, General Liu pointed out. You've been taking correspondence courses and reading advanced texts for years. In many ways, your education is more practical and applicable than what most officers receive in traditional programs. The conversation turned to Sarah's current situation and the treatment she had been receiving. The generals listened with growing anger as she reluctantly described months of harassment, bullying, and systematic mistreatment. She tried to downplay it, not wanting to seem like she was complaining, but the pattern they heard was clear and inexcusable. This ends today, General Hayes said firmly. And I mean all of it. You will never again be subjected to the kind of treatment you've been receiving. What happens to Sergeant Morrison and the others? Sarah asked. That depends partly on you, General Thompson replied. You could file formal complaints that would end several careers, and you would be completely justified in doing so. But you also have the option of letting us handle this through other channels. Sarah thought about this for a long moment. She had the power to destroy the men who had made her life miserable, but something inside her rebelled against the idea of revenge. What would my father have done? She asked. The three generals exchanged glances. They had all known James Chin well, and they knew exactly what kind of man he had been. Your father would have focused on the mission and the greater good, General Liu said. He would have wanted justice, but not revenge. He would have wanted the behavior to stop and the system to be fixed so it couldn't happen to anyone else. Then, that's what I want too, Sarah said quietly. General Hayes nodded approvingly. We'll handle the disciplinary actions through administrative channels. Morrison and his group will face consequences, but it will be done quietly and professionally. More importantly, we're going to make sure this kind of systematic mistreatment doesn't happen again. The conversation then shifted to Sarah's future. The possibilities they laid out were beyond anything she had ever imagined. They offered her immediate promotion to officer training, with retroactive benefits and compensation for the years she had lost. They described positions in military intelligence where her language skills and analytical abilities would be highly valued. There's also the option of specialized training, General Thompson explained. Your father's old unit is always looking for people with your particular combination of skills. It would mean extensive training, dangerous assignments, and a level of responsibility that most people your age never see. Sarah's head was spinning. Yesterday she had been scrubbing floors and being treated like an unwanted burden. Today she was being offered opportunities that could change her entire life trajectory. I need to ask, she said hesitantly, is this happening because of who my father was, or because of who I am? It was General Liu who answered. Both, he said honestly. Your father's sacrifice earned you the right to have your potential properly evaluated. But everything we're offering you is based on your own merits and abilities. We wouldn't insult your father's memory by offering you positions you couldn't handle. The meeting continued for another hour as they discussed practicalities, living arrangements, training schedules, security clearances, and the complex process of transitioning from maintenance worker to military officer. Sarah's mind struggled to keep up with all the information, but she found herself feeling something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. As the formal discussion wound down, the three generals' demeanor became more personal. They shared stories about her father, his sense of humor, his dedication to his men, his pride when he talked about his brilliant daughter who was going to change the world someday. He carried your picture with him everywhere, General Hayes revealed. It was your high school graduation photo. He would show it to anyone who would look and talk about how proud he was of you. Sarah felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't tears of humiliation or fear. They were tears of grief for the father she was only now beginning to understand, and tears of joy for the future that was suddenly opening up before her. There's one more thing, General Thompson said as they prepared to conclude the meeting. Tomorrow morning, there's going to be a formal ceremony to present you with your father's Medal of Honor. It's long overdue, but we want to do it right. Will it be public? Sarah asked. That's up to you, General Hayes replied. It can be a private ceremony with just us, or we can invite the entire base to witness it. Given what's happened here, it might send an important message about who you really are. Sarah thought about Sergeant Morrison, about Johnson and the others who had tormented her, about all the people who had dismissed her as unimportant. Then, she thought about her father and what he would want her to do. I want it to be public, she said firmly. I want everyone to understand that my father was a hero, and that the way they've been treating me reflects on them, not on me. As the meeting ended and Sarah prepared to leave the conference room, she realized that her life had been permanently transformed. She was no longer the invisible girl, the nobody that everyone ignored. She was the daughter of a war hero, a woman with extraordinary potential, and someone who commanded the respect of the highest levels of military leadership. But the real test was still to come. Tomorrow's ceremony would be just the beginning. Sarah would have to prove herself worthy of the opportunity she was being given, and she would have to do it while everyone on the base watched and judged her every move. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and bright, but Sarah barely noticed the weather. She stood in front of the small mirror in her quarters, wearing a crisp new dress uniform that had been delivered the night before. The transformation was startling. Gone was the invisible maintenance worker in coveralls, replaced by a confident-looking officer whose bearing commanded respect. Word had spread throughout Fort Braxton about the ceremony, though most of the gossip was confused and contradictory. Some soldiers had heard that the cleaning girl was related to someone important. Others whispered that she was actually an undercover inspector. The truth was so extraordinary that few people would have believed it if they hadn't seen the preparations with their own eyes. Sergeant Morrison hadn't slept at all. He had spent the night going through Sarah's personnel file, finally, reading the reports and recommendations he had ignored for months. What he found terrified him. Sarah's suggestions for improving base operations were brilliant and detailed. Her efficiency reports were flawless. Her test scores were better than his own. He had been systematically mistreating someone who was not only more qualified than he was, but who had the protection of three of the most powerful generals in the army. At 0900 hours, the entire base assembled in the main parade ground. It was the largest gathering in recent memory, with soldiers standing in perfect formation while officers lined the reviewing stand. The three visiting generals took their positions at the center, with General Hayes holding a blue velvet box that contained the Medal of Honor. When Sarah emerged from the administrative building and began walking across the parade ground, the assembled soldiers fell silent. Many of them had never seen her in anything other than work clothes, and the transformation was shocking. She walked with perfect military bearing, her head held high, looking like she belonged in uniform. Johnson and his friends stood near the back, trying to make themselves invisible. They had spent a sleepless night wondering if they were going to be arrested, court-martialed, or simply drummed out of the army in disgrace. The sight of Sarah in full dress uniform was like a slap in the face, a reminder of how badly they had misjudged her importance and significance. As Sarah reached the reviewing stand, General Hayes stepped forward to address the assembled troops. Her voice carried clearly across the parade ground as she began to speak about courage, sacrifice, and the true meaning of military service. 15 years ago, she announced, Captain James Chin gave his life to save 12 of his fellow soldiers during a classified operation in Afghanistan. His actions that day exemplified the highest traditions of military service: courage under fire, selfless dedication to his comrades, and an unwavering commitment to the mission. The assembled soldiers listened with growing attention as General Hayes described the details of the operation that had claimed Sarah's father's life. Many of them had never heard of James Chen, but the story of his heroism was compelling and inspiring. Captain Chen was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his extraordinary courage and sacrifice, General Hayes continued. Today, we have the honor of presenting that medal to his daughter, Sarah Chen, who has served this base with distinction and dignity despite facing challenges that would have broken lesser individuals. As General Hayes spoke, Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride in her father's heroism, grief for the loss she was only now beginning to understand, and a growing sense of her own worth and potential. She was no longer the invisible girl, she was the daughter of a hero, and she was surrounded by people who finally saw her for who she really was. When the formal presentation began, General Liu stepped forward to place the medal around Sarah's neck. The ribbon was blue with white stars, and the medal itself was heavy with history and meaning. As it settled into place, Sarah felt the weight of her father's legacy and her own responsibility to live up to it. This medal belongs not just to Captain Chen, but to his daughter, who has demonstrated the same courage, integrity, and commitment to service that defined her father's life, General Liu announced. Sarah Chen is a reminder to all of us that heroism comes in many forms, and that we must never judge others by their appearance, their position, or our own limited understanding of their worth. The ceremony continued with a formal reading of the citation that accompanied the Medal of Honor. As the details of her father's final mission were read aloud, Sarah began to understand the full magnitude of what he had sacrificed. He hadn't just died for his country, he had died to save the lives of specific men who had families and futures and dreams of their own. When the reading was complete, General Thompson stepped forward to address Sarah directly. Miss Chen, he said formally, your country owes you a debt that can never fully be repaid. Your father's sacrifice saved not just the lives of 12 soldiers, but all the lives they have touched since then, their wives, their children, their communities. By accepting this medal, you are accepting the responsibility to continue his legacy of service and sacrifice." Sarah's response was brief but powerful. Standing at attention before the assembled base, she spoke clearly and confidently. "I accept this medal not just for myself, but for all the men and women who serve in positions where their contributions are overlooked or undervalued. My father taught me that true service often happens in the shadows, performed by people who never expect recognition or reward. I promise to honor his memory by living up to the standards he set, and by treating every person I meet with the respect and dignity they deserve." The applause that followed was thunderous and sustained. As Sarah stood there receiving the recognition that was long overdue, she noticed faces in the crowd that told the story of her transformation. Some soldiers looked ashamed; they recognized her as the woman they had ignored or mistreated. Others looked amazed, struggling to reconcile the impressive officer before them with the maintenance worker they thought they knew. Sergeant Morrison was crying openly, finally, understanding the magnitude of his failure to recognize Sarah's worth. He would later request a transfer to another base, unable to face the daily reminder of how badly he had misjudged someone under his command. After the formal ceremony concluded, the three generals escorted Sarah to a private reception where she met other officers and officials who had known her father. Each conversation revealed new aspects of James Chen's character and service, building a more complete picture of the man who had shaped her values but kept his heroism hidden. Colonel Martinez, who had served alongside Sarah's father in Afghanistan, pulled her aside for a personal conversation. "Your father saved my life twice," he told her quietly. "Once in combat, and once by talking me through the worst period of my life when I came home. He had a gift for seeing people's potential and helping them find their way. I can see that same gift in you." As the reception continued, Sarah found herself at the center of conversations about her future. The opportunities that had been offered the day before were formalized with specific timelines and expectations. She would begin officer training immediately, with an accelerated program that recognized her existing knowledge and capabilities. After that, she would have her choice of assignments, including positions in military intelligence that would make full use of her language skills and analytical abilities. But perhaps the most significant moment came when a young private approached her hesitantly. "Ma'am," he said nervously, "I just wanted to apologize. I was one of the people who didn't treat you right. I didn't know who you were, but that's no excuse. I'm sorry." Sarah's response showed the character that had impressed the generals from the beginning. "You don't owe me an apology," she said kindly. "You owe it to yourself to be better in the future. The rank on someone's collar or the job they're assigned doesn't determine their worth as a human being. Remember that, and you'll be a better soldier and a better person." As the day wound down, Sarah found herself alone with the three generals who had changed her life so dramatically. They sat in the same conference room where, just 24 hours earlier, she had learned the truth about her father's service and her own potential. "How do you feel?" General Hayes asked. Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. "Grateful," she said finally. "Overwhelmed. Responsible. And ready." "Ready for what?" General Thompson inquired. "Ready to prove that your faith in me is justified," Sarah replied. "Ready to serve with the same dedication my father showed. Ready to make sure that no one else goes through what I went through, being dismissed and overlooked because people can't see past their own assumptions." General Liu smiled. "That's exactly what your father would have said." 6 months later, Second Lieutenant Sarah Chen was serving in military intelligence, using her language skills and analytical abilities to support operations around the world. Her reputation for competence and integrity spread quickly through the military community, and she became known as someone who could be trusted with the most sensitive assignments. But she never forgot where she came from. Every time she encountered someone in a service position, maintenance workers, kitchen staff, administrative personnel, she made sure to treat them with respect and dignity. She learned their names, acknowledged their contributions, and looked for opportunities to help them advance their own careers. The invisible girl who had been mocked and beaten down was gone forever, replaced by a confident officer who understood that true leadership meant lifting others up rather than putting them down. Sarah Chen had found her place in the world, not despite her humble beginnings, but because of the strength and character they had given her. The Medal of Honor hung in a place of honor in her quarters, a constant reminder of her father's sacrifice and her own responsibility to live up to his example. But the real measure of her transformation wasn't in the medal or the rank on her collar, it was in the way she treated others and the difference she made in their lives. Sarah had learned that being seen and valued wasn't something that happened to you, it was something you created through your actions, your character, and your commitment to treating everyone with the dignity and respect they deserved. Her father had taught her that lesson through his example, and now she was teaching it to others through hers. The girl who had once been invisible was now impossible to ignore, not because of her position or her achievements, but because of who she had chosen to become.